was pilloried for giving amnesty to these people. I don't know if you recall that. But this law also stated no more illegal immigrants can be, or undocumented immigrants can be allowed. So they moved, before that, immigration enforcement was primarily at workplaces, but after this law was passed, they decided to move it primarily to the border because employers don't like it when you show up and round up all their workers. So there's always been this tension between the employers that want to employ people and this call to keep them out. So the agreement was, we'll just stop them at the border. Okay, this photo of migrants being arrested in the Rio Grande Valley, which is South Texas. Arrests peaked at 1.6 million in 2000. And by 2010, they had dropped to levels not seen since 1971. Because they had built these walls, the border's 2,000 miles long, and about half of that, 1,200 miles, is the Rio Grande, which forms kind of a natural barrier. So from the mid-1990s on, the walls went up in major cities, sister cities like San Diego, Tijuana, El Paso, Juarez, Nogales, Sonora, Nogales, Arizona, Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. And these walls extended way out into the oceans on both sides. And the idea behind the walls was prevention through deterrence, that people would give up and go home if you made it too hard for them to cross. But instead, they started taking greater risks, crossing out in the desert, and cartels took over, and this is the situation that he describes in Solito, where it's becoming more and more dangerous, and you have to go farther and farther out to cross. And so desert deaths and drownings in the Rio Grande, and then there's this canal that runs along the California border called the All-American Canal, where a lot of people have drowned as well. Okay, so this is the situation now that as I said, that the 1.6 million people crossed in the year 2000. So a lot of these migration is connected more with what's going on in people's home countries and the lure of jobs in the U.S. than any kind of border enforcement. And they've done studies to find that it's really when people will come when there is danger in their countries, when there's a job in the U.S. for them, and the border wall, they don't even know that it's there, or they think they can get past it. A lot of people don't really understand how dangerous it is and how many people have died trying to cross the border. Like Javier, the kid in Solito, he came for family reunification, but his parents came because of the Salvadoran Civil War and the gang violence that had started there. So that a lot of this migration is connected to violence in people's countries. Crossing the border without documentation is a civil, not a criminal offense, but the federal government keeps trying to change that. George Bush Jr. started a program called Operation Streamline in 2005 to give migrants criminal records so they would be easily deportable and excludable in the future. And so they started having mass sentencings of migrants, 70 or more people in shackles before judges. And this sort of overwhelmed the U.S. court system. And this was still not enough of a deterrent, so they instituted family separation in 2017. Okay, here we have, these are migrants camped out at the border in Nogales in the spring of 2018. This was taken by a friend of mine. And these were people who had come up and they were waiting to get an appointment to apply for asylum. And this was, when Trump started freaking out about migration, he set up this thing called metering, where they would only see a certain number of people each day, or wait in Mexico, another policy where they would not let people in to apply for asylum. They had to wait in Mexico. People would send them to this, they would give them a quickie asylum hearing, and if they didn't qualify, then they would say, sorry, you have to be deported. And they would separate the parents from the children and send the parents through Operation Streamline. And I attended an Operation Streamline hearing. I describe it in the book, where there was a man there whose son had been taken from him. And he was saying to the judge, where is my kid? Where is my kid? And the judge was like, I don't know where your kid is. I'm just here to sentence you to a crime for having crossed the border illegally. If you cross the border illegally 2 or 3 times, you are permanently excluded from the United States. So this family separation policy, we saw a documentary on it here last week, if any of you were here for that. Under that policy, more than 5,000 kids, even infants, were taken from their parents between 2017 and 2019, when a judge ordered it stopped. And so 1,000 or more of these 5,000 kids have not been reunited with their parents. A lot of the parents were deported and they don't know where they are. Okay, so this is the comedor, or the lunchroom in Nogales, Sonora. It's run by the Kino Border Initiative, which is a Catholic initiative of the Catholic Church. They were in a temporary trailer when this photo was taken a few years ago. They now have a more permanent building across the street. These are migrants lined up to get lunch. And in addition to food, they give them, the nuns and the volunteers give them basic medical care, clothes, assistance finding shelter, and also advice on how to stay safe crossing the border. Many of the people who are lined up here have been deported several times, and they're going to try again. Okay, this is this death map that Humane Borders, it's an organization that puts water stations in the desert. And they show this map, they have like laminated versions of this map that they show people at the lunchroom when they're waiting to cross the border. And here it says, no vaya usted, do not go, there's not enough water, no vale la pena, it's not worth it. So this is Sasabe, and this is, Nogales is down here about 20, this is about 20 miles, it says 1 day walking, 2 day walking, 3 day walking, un día caminando, dos días caminando. So they're giving a sense of how long it would take. This is about these are 10-mile increments. And each one of these red dots is where a body has been found. And this map is fairly old, so there's been probably many more bodies found since then. The water stations are they put like a big drums of water out in the desert in these various locations. So these are where the water stations are. And people cross anyway, knowing how dangerous it is. Here's all these instructions: bring water, don't go with people you don't trust, because people. And then this is months in July and August and September. It's really, really hot out here, and he describes in his book what it was like crossing out there in the desert. It's not like the Sahara. This desert is covered with cactus plants. Cholla, prickly pear, saguaro, barrel cactus, lots of different, every plant out there is covered with prickers because they need to keep their water. It's so dry and hot that the plants are very protective against any animal eating them. So there's a lot of danger out there from the plants. Okay, so so there's not only people dying in the desert, but people are drowning in the Rio Grande. People are being killed in vehicle accidents. An estimated 10,000 people have died on the U.S.-Mexico border in the last 20 years since the crackdown was started in the early 2000s, and many thousands more in Mexico. Climbing the Bestia, which is this train that people ride on, and also people have been killed by cartels. There's been several mass killings of migrants reported in Mexico. Okay. This is a screenshot of a secretly shot video group called No More Deaths set up a hidden camera. They put water out there in the desert, and Border Patrol agents have been known to kick over water and other forms of abuse of migrants. I'm not saying they're all like this, but they did document that this kind of stuff is happening. Also, the Forest Service doesn't like people leaving. A lot of the land out there is publicly owned land, federally owned land, and workers for No More Deaths and Samaritans and Humane Borders have been arrested and charged with littering, with driving in restricted areas, things that they do in order to help, or illegal camping, because some of them have set up like first aid camps out in the desert to try to help people. They go out there and look for bodies as well. There's a whole organization that tries to locate missing people and find bodies and reunite them with their families. And it's hard to identify a lot of the bodies that have been found in the desert because they disintegrate so quickly. Okay, there's been several cases as well of Border Patrol agents shooting and killing people. One of the most egregious one, an agent put 10 bullets in the back of a 16-year-old kid, Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez, through the fence in Nogales in 2012. This agent was tried for murder and acquitted, but the jury was hung on manslaughter charges, and they tried him again, and the jury was again deadlocked, and the government declined to try him a third time. According to the data collected by the Southern Border Communities Coalition, about 50 people have been killed by Border Patrol agents since 2004. Only a handful of agents were tried, and no Border Patrol agent has ever been convicted for killing someone on duty in the 100-year history of the Border Patrol. Okay, so this next group of photographs were taken by my friend Judy Borg. She's a nun who goes out with Tucson Samaritans to a border camp near Sasabe, Arizona. As you can see, the border wall has been paved now. This is all new wall that's been put up since Trump. The first Trump administration. It was extremely hard to build these walls out here in these remote areas. She said the cement trucks, they have to get going really fast because there's the dips, the roads, the border was very hilly out here. So it was very expensive. The border wall, let me see, there's been, how many miles of border wall has been built? The border now is about 650 miles of wall, built at a cost of $23 million a mile. And it's also very expensive to maintain these walls. And especially in the Rio Grande Valley, the Rio Grande Valley, next to the river there's floodplain, there's erosion, so it's very complicated environmentally to build walls that close to the river. So some of the walls in the Rio Grande Valley are actually a mile inland, which has made people mad because there's this sort of no man's land between where the wall is and where the actual river is. Also, in the Rio Grande Valley, a lot of the land is privately owned, so the government has been using eminent domain to take over people's land in order to build walls. So there's a lot of lawsuits and environmental concern about what's going on in the Rio Grande Valley. And out here, most of this land is federally owned, so there hasn't been that much complaints. Okay, so this is where the wall ends, outside of Sasabe, Arizona. Sasabe is a tiny little town, and the wall extends 20 miles. Okay, let me see here what I have here. People walking around the end of the border wall, which ends 25 miles east of Sasabe, and this is about 20 miles west of Nogales. These pictures were taken in December. About 40 people a day were crossing at this location. And Judy, my nun friend, told me there was 100 a day a few days before this photo was taken. Okay, this is the camp that the Tucson Samaritans have set up. This is the camp at dawn. She said that they've had this camp for 3 years. They keep moving it as the wall extends farther. They've seen thousands of people in that time, mostly from Central America, some from Mexico. In the last few years, they've also seen a lot of Venezuelans and Ecuadorians, Nicaraguans and Cubans. Recently, there's people from African countries, including Congo, Togo, Burkina Faso, Angola, Cameroon, Mauritania, and Nigeria. That's just a small sample of a number of the countries where people are coming from. Also people from South Asia, including India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Not too many Haitians cross here. They mostly cross in South Texas. And Chinese people tend to cross more in Southern California because people cross where there are historic smuggling routes, and the relationships are formed between smugglers and the sending countries. Okay, these are migrants with dawn at the camp. Judy says she heads out to the camp every day around 3:30 in the morning. It's a 2-hour drive from Tucson. Usually she and 3 other volunteers. They want to be there when migrants cross at first light. They're dropped off by armed cartel members on the Mexican side, and then they walk around the end of the fence. One volunteer told me she saw a man get down on his knees and kiss the ground when he came through the fence, like her ancestor at Ellis Island. However, these people are all going to be picked up by the Border Patrol. Okay, they give them hot chocolate, ramen noodle soup. They had a satellite phone. They will help them call family members. Some of them don't speak English or Spanish. She says they coach them on what to say to the Border Patrol, how to request asylum, and they warn them that the Border Patrol will take away their phones and money and their other possessions, so they need to write their phone numbers on their skin or on their other clothes. Okay, these are all taken around the same day. Migrants wait around the fire. Recently, she told me she had a 15-year-old girl from Guatemala traveling alone, showed up at the camp. She came with 2 men from Tibet, but she wasn't with them, and she did not want to come near the camp. She finally did because it was all women working at the camp. She will probably be sent to a shelter for unaccompanied minors. These shelters are run by an organization called Southwest Key, and there's a number of them, including one in Tucson that I visited in 2016 that I describe in my book, what it's like in there. Okay, now here the Border Patrol truck arrives to pick up the migrants. They would come 4 times a day when there was a number of people crossing, but now they only come 2 times a day. Since these pictures were taken, their forward base at Sasabe has been closed, and so they take migrants to the station in Nogales. The number of people crossing, I don't know if you've heard this, is now the lowest point in 15 years. Border apprehensions went from 8,000 a day at the peak a couple of years ago to 8,450 in the month of February 2025. So they basically went from 8,000 a day during the peak, and now it's 8,000 in an entire month for the entire border. Okay, migrants line up. Okay, migrants were being allowed to apply for asylum under Biden. He'd set up this app where you could get an appointment. But Trump canceled that for his first day in office. And now all these people, if they try to apply for asylum, they will be, if they have a really good case for asylum, it's possible they will put you in detention and check you out and then let you go with an ankle monitor. Typically, the only people who are allowed to apply for asylum now are Cubans. Prior to Trump being in office, there was a shelter in Tucson called Casa Alitas that was getting money to, the Border Patrol would process these people and release them, and Casa Alitas would take care of them for 3 days, help them make contact with family members, they would take them to the airport, help them to get on a plane. Casa Alitas saw more than 500,000 people over the last 6 years, at a cost of $120 million, which was paid for by the Federal Shelter and Services Program, which is part of FEMA. Casa Alitas is now closed, and the feds have just announced that they're going to try to get the money back. Well, they're going to withhold the last $7 million in reimbursement because they say the shelter was aiding and abetting illegal immigrants. And they want the names of everyone helped, even though they already have everyone's name because everyone that Casa Alitas helped was released by the Border Patrol. The feds are also trying to end legal aid for migrants, but the judge reversed that order. There's a lot of these lawsuits that are currently ongoing. The state of Texas is also suing a migrant shelter called Annunciation House in El Paso, claiming it was running a migrant smuggling operation. All these cases are ongoing, but basically the U.S. government has ended any aid for migrants. Okay, these are more shots of migrants. They'll start walking along the wall if they are waiting for the Border Patrol and the Border Patrol doesn't show up. Okay, the shelters in Nogales, they're almost empty now. There's a few deportees. The Mexican government has been working, to avoid Trump's tariffs, they agreed to stop all migrants in southern Mexico, basically. So Judy said no one from South America has showed up in recent weeks. Migrants are stopped after they go through the Darien Gap in Panama. Darien Gap is a stretch of jungle about 60 miles long between Colombia and Panama. The Pan American Highway does not run through there, so it's controlled by armed gangs. Anyone who comes from South America has to go through there. It's very dangerous, but more than 1 million people have passed through the Darien Gap in the last 5 years. So currently deportees are being sent to camps in southern Mexico because Panama is also under pressure from Trump. He's threatening to seize the Panama Canal, so they have also agreed to take migrants from Asian countries deported from the U.S. Last week, Panama allowed a bunch of migrants that they'd held in a camp near the jungle to get out, but they took their passports and their phones. They've signed agreeing to leave Panama after 30 days. And deportees are also being sent to Guantanamo. You've probably heard about this. But then they were flown back and placed in immigration jails in the U.S. A lot of the immigration detention in the U.S. is run by private prisons. A company called Core Civic and Geo Group are the two large private prisons. And they have contracts with the U.S. government. Okay, here's more people walking along the wall. People who show up now, frequently they've been on the road for 6 months. They don't know or they haven't heard that circumstances have changed and they can't go back to Mexico. It's too dangerous. Judy says they want them to call the Border Patrol. She said they are still hoping to get asylum. As you may have heard, that Trump also has canceled protected status for people from Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and they may be deported starting later this year. Haitians are a particular issue here in Massachusetts because half of the 30,000 people with temporary protected status in Massachusetts are Haitians. Okay. People now know they will be deported. I asked Judy why they don't just disappear into the desert, knowing that when the Border Patrol shows up, they're going to be deported. And she said, they know they will die. There's no one to guide them. Some do disappear into the desert when they know they're going to be deported, but most wait for the Border Patrol to pick them up. Okay, these last few images were taken in the last week or so, last couple of weeks. Okay, here, Mexican military, Mexico sent 10,000 troops to the border. Judy said they have not been showing up at their camp, but this is the one day that they were there. Okay, here you have Mexican military on the Mexican side, and this is Mexican military vehicles. She said that this is the Border Patrol vehicle. This is where the wall ends here, about 20 miles east of Sasabe. She said that they showed up and took pictures and left. And most of pretty much all of the crossings on the Mexican side are controlled by different cartels. She said in our area it's a soft offshoot of the Sinaloa cartel called Los Memos. And there's a migrant aid group that Javier mentions in his book called Salva Vision that did have a migrant shelter in Sasabe, but it got so dangerous there was like shootouts in the street that she had to close it. Okay, this is a vehicle that belongs to these vigilantes. They do show up. These are Trump supporters who are upset about migration. They will show up at the camp from time to time and take photographs and post them. There's been a history of vigilante activity on the border. In the 1980s, there was a group called Light Up the Border that would park their cars at night. This was south of San Diego, and aim their car lights toward Tijuana. And then there's there was a rancher in Cochise County, Arizona, who bragged about rounding up thousands of migrants. But some of the people he rounded up were U.S. citizens, so he got into trouble. There was a lawsuit against him, and he had to give up his ranch. The U.S. has also been sending troops. I skipped over this. U.S. troops on the border. Let me go back to that for a sec, because this is important. The U.S. has also been sending troops to the border to support the Border Patrol and customs officials, but they haven't shown up at this camp. And there's laws that prevent U.S. military from being involved in civilian law enforcement, and basically you don't want people with high-powered weapons going against mothers with babies in their arms. However, there's this constant push by some people in the U.S. government to allow the U.S. The military to be involved in civilian law enforcement. It actually happened in the 1990s. The first President Bush sent troops to the border, and in 1997, a Marine on anti-drug maneuvers shot and killed an 18-year-old kid who was pasturing his goats along the Rio Grande. That was the first killing of a U.S. civilian by the military since Kent State. So ever since that, the military has said we do not want to be doing this. Okay, these are also screenshots posted by this anti-immigrant vigilante. There is a group called Wall Watch that does monitor vigilante activity on the border. The vigilantes sometimes they're armed, and sometimes they will approach the migrant aid workers at the camp and say, "You people are child molesters, aiding child trafficking, aiding pedophiles," but most of the time, the Border Patrol definitely wants them to stay away. The Border Patrol does not want these vigilantes involved because it'd just be too dangerous. This is another post by a vigilante just a couple of weeks ago. Okay, here the Forest Service comes around and makes sure that the campsite is clean, that the latrine isn't operating. Judy said they're very concerned about the fire ring. They check to make sure that the camp is safe. And she said that they weren't very friendly, but most recently, this guy was friendly when he showed up. Maybe because the Forest Service is under attack by the Trump administration. But she said most recently when he was there, he's very nice. And she asked him about a cross that they had put up for a 40-year-old woman who died on the Mexican side of the wall. Her 15-year-old son had come over to the camp and asked for help, but by the time they got to her, she was dead. They carried her body to the camp, and they put up a cross, and the Forest Service guy said, it's okay. There's lots of crosses out there. They just sort of blend in. There's an artist from Tucson who's been putting up crosses in places where people have died in the desert. Okay, I'm running a little behind here, of course. Okay, this is El Jefe. He is a jaguar, as you see. And I'm just going to read a little bit about El Jefe from my book, if that's okay. The video's opening shot shows the jaguar walking right by the camera at night, ghostly and surreal. He glances to the side, and for a moment his eyes shine bright yellow, as if from an inner fire that also radiates white from his cheeks and neck and undercarriage. His ears are cocked forward, his stride purposeful but unhurried. His paws look big and brown and almost clownish, like he's wearing dirty leopard print slippers. His movements can convey stealth, yet a complete lack of fear. After a few seconds, he pads away, the dark rosettes on his spotted tan coat shimmering in the dark. Then the scene changes to daytime, and the jaguar is caught twice more, first by one camera as he strolls down a forest trail in dappled sunlight, and then by another on a cloudy day as he steps over a shallow rocky pool and saunters off into the distance. In all, he's shown for about 45 seconds. This video of a jaguar nicknamed El Jefe, the boss, roaming the Santa Rita Mountains near Tucson between 2012 and 2015 caused a sensation when it was released in February 2016. It went viral, quickly garnering tens of millions of views. The images received worldwide news coverage not only because they revealed El Jefe's magnificent self, but because they proved jaguars were coming from Mexico as far north as 60 miles in the United States. El Jefe joined 6 other distinct jaguars photographed with remote cameras between 1996 and 2016 in the Santa Rita, Chiricahua, Huachuca, and Dos Cabezas, as well as other adjoining mountain ranges in southeastern Arizona and New Mexico. El Jefe and his kind were the first wild jaguars to be documented in the United States for many years, and their discovery was not met with unmitigated joy. Government authorities in charge of the border buildup and supporters of an open-pit mine planned for jaguar habitat in the Santa Rita Mountains dismissed the cat's presence as biologically insignificant. They contended that because no females had been found north of the border, the mine and the border wall would not affect jaguar recovery currently underway in Mexico. Okay, so this fight over the presence of jaguars in the United States has gone on for years. And there's a plan for a big mine, a big open pit mine in the exact same spot where this photograph was taken. So this is he's like a symbol of the environmental efforts against wall construction and mine construction. And joyfully, El Jefe was recently seen in Mexico. So we went back there looking for a mate. Most of the jaguars in the United States all of the jaguars in the United States were wiped out during predator control programs in the 1950s and 60s. And because there's no breeding population in the United States, the wall and mine people who are behind the walls and the mines say, oh, it doesn't matter if they're all kept in Mexico. But there's a lot of lawsuits about this very issue. So, okay, and this was also done by the artist who did the cross-border picnic, and he was working on this while he did the picnic. This is a giant poster of a baby. He worked with the local community to build this temporary installation of the baby, and as you see, he's overlooking the Border Patrol vehicle here. So this is the kind of artwork that's happening on the border, some very beautiful symbolism. So I should finish up here, but anyway, these local communities are doing a lot of very positive stuff like this. This was only up for a few months, but other artists, activists, filmmakers, writers, academics, musicians, athletes are working on all kinds of cross-border organizations addressing education, microloans, immigration, voting rights, legal rights, gun control, worker rights, indigenous rights, women's rights, gay rights, environmental issues. Many of these groups are mentioned in my book and also in this handout that I have in the back. Historian Colin Woodard has noted the border is a hotbed of democratic reform and revolutionary sentiments. As border people, because they're so far from the power centers in both countries, they are independent, they're self-reliant, and they are resistant of tyranny. So the border environment also, the harsh environment makes people, they're very independent and self-sufficient. It's a lot of youthful energy, a lot of people hoping for a new life. Okay, and I will end with this, just reading another little segment from the very last page of my book. A pastor called Bernard Lafayette Jr. came to Tucson a few years ago. He worked with Martin Luther King. He was a nonviolent activist. He's a Quaker. He was involved with lunch counter sit-ins and other civil rights activities. He's probably now in his early 80s. And he came to Tucson to speak on Kingian nonviolence, border justice, and immigrant rights. I should note that Martin Luther King came 2 times to Tucson because he wanted to promote communities where he thought he could make connections with people. Lafayette said he very rarely, he got a lot of speaking invitations, but he only accepted them where he thought he could really make a difference. And when he was in Tucson, he visited the Tohono O'odham Reservation, which was also highly unusual in those days. Okay, so when Lafayette came to Tucson and spoke, he mentioned the beautiful mountains surrounding the city, and echoing King's last speech, he said, "The mountaintop in Tucson is what King had in mind." His reference to the mountaintop reminded me of my drive down to Patagonia. There's a town in southern Arizona near the border called Patagonia. The previous February, the road had wound along the eastern flank of the Santa Rita Mountains, not yet spoiled by the Rosemont mine. Several Border Patrol vehicles passed by, going in both directions. The checkpoint on the opposite side of the road heading north was manned by a dozen or more agents. Then the big new Border Patrol station at the Sonoyta Crossroads came into view. U.S., Arizona, and Border Patrol flags flapped on the 3 separate poles out front. Parked in the adjoining lot and surrounded by razor wire-topped fence were scores of brand new, bright white, dog catcher type SUVs. I slowed to count them. There were at least 150. The sight was formidable, but as I looked south toward Mexico, the rows of vehicles were dwarfed by the Patagonia Mountains lining the horizon. The towering, jagged peaks put the enormity and futility of the Border Patrol's task into perspective. The goal of a peaceful border, a border where so much death and suffering no longer occurred, loomed as great and mysterious and eternal as the mountains themselves. They filled my field of vision, yet as I approached, seemed to recede into the sky as if containing a treasure forever out of reach. They were symbols of the peaceable kingdom, God's paradise right here on earth between the United States and Mexico. Okay. And that's it. Thank you. Okay. All right. I can take a few questions, and then if anybody wants a copy of my book, they are for sale in the back. Yes.
I understand the developed world has a need for workers because of the declining population of young people.
Yeah, there's a. Can you hand her the mic? Yeah.
No, I don't speak language.
I guess we could put on the lights.
Yeah, I understand. Is that right? Does it work?
It's not on. Probably not. You have to turn it on.
I just turned it on. That's on? No. There's something more complicated than that.
How much close? Okay.
I understand
The developed
world. It doesn't
have enough workers because of the declining population
Yes.
and rising education level, and that Canada is among those countries that actually gives everything to their immigrants, anything they need. education, of course, for all citizens is free and no less so for immigrants. So I'm wondering what the motivation is in our country.
To get,
I'm-
you know, look
my-
at strawberries in the morning.
Yes.
You know, they don't know what this happens.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the bike.
Hello?
Yeah, there are those who say that this current anti-immigrant wave, you know, these anti-immigrant and pro-immigrant policies, they sort of come in a cyclical way. And, you know, right now we're in this very anti-immigrant, I mean, extreme but, you know, a lot of Trump's policies make no sense whatsoever, you know, and as we were pointing out, you know, his wife is an immigrant, Elon Musk is an immigrant, I mean, there's a lot of, so it's basically just poor people that they don't want, although half of all undocumented immigrants are visa overstayers, people who come in on tourist visas or work, travel visa, tourism, or student visas. So basically, there's a lot of prejudice against these people who are coming from foreign countries. But the studies frequently show that these people who show up at the border are frequently not the poorest of the poor in their countries. They frequently have education, they have the wherewithal to get there, they're ambitious, they've crossed thousands of miles, so they really are the kind of people, and a lot of them do have really good cases for political asylum too. So they really are the kind of people, and it's not to say there aren't some bad people among them, but that's why we should have thorough vetting of people. But the more we say no immigrants allowed, and then people go out into the desert, then we're not vetting them at all. So we could have much more rational immigration policies. There's a professor in England named Alexander Betts, I think, he's at Oxford, who's written a lot about ways that immigrants can be properly integrated into the community. There's models in other countries that are successful in this. So anyway, I'm hopeful that, yes, we are currently in this very anti-immigrant phase, but you're right, we need immigrants. And there's a lot of talk that if we had not had all this immigration in the last few years, the U.S. economy would not be doing anywhere near as well as it is. So that's we just have to keep, so a lot of these people I think are biding their time, waiting until the situation changes, and so they will try it, and we'll try again. Yeah?
Can you define the word asylum?
Define the word asylum. Yes, sorry I should have done that, but after World War II, and a lot of, you know, it was horrible what happened in World War II. A lot of Jews were turned away, and they ended up, you know, in concentration camps. And so the United Nations, with our agreement, passed this policy that a person who has a well-founded fear of persecution on the basis of race, religion, a couple of other specific factors, is entitled to political asylum. That person is a refugee as opposed to an economic migrant. They're trying to separate out who is fleeing for economic reasons and who is fleeing for political reasons. However, if you're fleeing from doesn't matter if it's a gang member trying to kill you or a government official trying to kill you in terms of, you know, and so these distinctions are kind of somewhat arbitrary, but that's the distinction that the U.S. government makes. So people who have a well-founded fear of persecution are legally entitled to asylum in the United States, or they were until Trump canceled any and all asylum applications, which legally he can't do. So there's so much of the stuff that he's done that legally he's not allowed to do. But people are not being, at the moment, they're not being allowed to apply for asylum. But that is the law, that they are, a person who is a refugee is legally entitled to asylum in the United States. But again, it's very arbitrarily enforced. For example, when we were supporting the government of El Salvador, the government of El Salvador was killing its people, we couldn't say that people fleeing El Salvador were political refugees because we were supporting the very government. And that was the case in Solito, you know, that very, very few Salvadorans could get political asylum. And that's why the sanctuary movement began in the mid-1980s, because they were deporting people back to death squads. And there were actual studies showing that we were deporting people who were subsequently killed when they were returned to El Salvador. So it's very political, this who gets asylum and who doesn't. Like, for example, Cubans, they almost always get asylum because we don't like the government of Cuba. So, so if we don't like, in Venezuela supposedly has this communist government, And we were giving them temporary status, the Venezuelans, but ever since Trump came in, he said that Venezuelans can't have temporary status. And as she said, there's no more Venezuelans coming because they can't get north of the Darien Gap, this jungle region. You know, and of course there's always people who have money. People who have money, they just fly right in. It's a totally different situation for people who have a lot of money. These people will have enough money, a few $1,000s to pay the coyotes, but they don't have hundreds of thousands, which you can, obviously, the U.S. will accept you. Didn't Trump offer the gold card to anyone who has $5 million, whatever it is? Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah.
I am an immigrant to the United States, and I want to say, and my husband is an immigrant, I got my green card as a 12-year-old. So, and we lived in Canada. When my husband wanted to move to the United States for a job, and we were moving, he had to go to the immigration office in Toronto. And I will tell you, the immigration officers in many, many of the other countries, and these are the U.S. immigration officers, are the rudest, most despicable human beings on earth. So as a result, the guy in Toronto tried to take my green card away from me. And if he had, I couldn't have got it back without fighting for it.
Right.
So then the next part, there's a whole bunch more in there, but when we finally got an appointment for my husband, and he came here, my kids were here illegally at teaching at school, but you know, they graduated from college now, no one's going to care. But the thing is that the Friday that we had an appointment in Toronto on Monday, and so, you know, like unpacking up the house kind of thing. And one of my neighbors called me and said, there's an immigration officer walking around questioning all of the neighbors about you and your husband, wanting to know if he was already here. Which he was, because he was going to drive to Toronto with us in the car. But why immigration feels like they have to, I mean, this is Falmouth. Why are they going, I had a green card. Why are they going around checking on people like that? And that's your tax dollars at the end. It's insane.
Well, there's, again, if you follow the news, there's been many recent cases like this of people being arrested. And there was a Venezuelan mother with her children. They were stopped for a traffic stop in Tucson, and now they're in jail in southern Mexico. And, you know, it's just, and this is why there's talk about a new sanctuary movement where people will go into a church, and although they've said, you know, we're not going to respect churches or schools or hospitals, but there is this sort of new underground railroad where people are hiding. It's been very disruptive to a lot of communities. The kids are afraid to go to school. The people are afraid to go to the store. This is, you know, happening right now in a lot of communities. That's why they arrested that Columbia student who was leading the protests against the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia last year. He has a green card, and I was reminded, I went to a talk by Maria, you know, Hosoff, you know her, she's a journalist. And she said her husband had a green card, and she was like, get your citizenship, because they can deport you. If you have a green card, they can deport you at any time for any reason. And they're even talking about deporting U.S. citizens, which I don't know where they're going to deport them to. But, so if you have a green card, yes, it definitely behooves you to get your, especially if you're a dark-skinned person. I'm surprised that you as a Canadian, because, you know, my husband's also Canadian, he's a white guy, you know, they have these checkpoints near the border. And he's always like waved right through, you know, yes sir, and no one ever questions his citizenship. And then there's a brown person whose family has lived on the border for centuries, and they're pulled over and checked. So and racial profiling has actually been deemed legal at checkpoints. I described that in my book, that they even have a checklist, sallow, olive, you know, they're checking people's skin colors and stuff like that at the checkpoints. And this has been ruled legal as a way, because how else are they going to determine who to stop? So there's been a lot of protests about the checkpoints. People that I described in my book, people on the border really don't like them. They're very bad for business. They hassle local people all the time. They set up a group that was near Arivaca, Arizona, there was a checkpoint watch group, and then the Border Patrol said you have to stand, 60 feet back, so there's a lawsuit about how far away they could stand from the checkpoint. So Border Patrol, people are really doing a lot of fighting back on the border in a lot of different ways, large and small. So, any more questions? Yeah.
What's the status for the people fighting back now? I mean, are they being threatened with being arrested and stuff like that more than before?
Yeah, well, this is, it's interesting. In Tucson, there's a lot of groups that work on legal aid and teaching people about, know your rights. There's this red card that they're distributing to people. There's a lot of training for the trainers, people. So there's a lot of activity in terms of people. But, a lot of this, they're just responding to what's happening. A lot of these latest things are legal in nature. So we will see what happens with these various lawsuits. But there's definitely a lot of activity on the border in terms of people responding to this. But which isn't to say that people aren't scared. I'm sure that the fallout from these Trump policies are very serious and long-lasting. So, but on the border, you try to have the long view. And I was talking about the various cycles of deportation, and then welcoming everybody, and then throwing everybody out, and so we're currently in a very throwing everybody out phase. But, yeah.
What do you make of the increase in support of Trump by Latinos along the border in the last election?
Yeah, that's a very interesting phenomenon. It's mostly taking place in Texas. The Texas border is really different. The border's such a large region that that what's happening in South Texas is different. And people are responding. The governor of Texas, this guy Greg Abbott, he has been. There's a big article in the recent New Yorker about Operation Lone Star. He's made his whole governorship about cracking down on undocumented people, putting up razor wire, putting up buoys in the Rio Grande, all kinds of stuff like that. And it's true that people on the border, they want, law and order, but they don't want to be hassled either, so, and I think with a lot of immigrants or people who live on the border, like we don't want to be associated with them. Them over there, we're good Americans, and and Texas is in general just a more conservative area. There's a lot of social conservatism among Latinos, so Republicans do. But I've heard that there's kind of been like, oh no, we voted for Trump and now he's trying to wrap us up. So there's somewhat of a, oh, they didn't know, how bad Trump is. The Arizona border is much more democratic. It's a much more liberal area. Also the California border, because our congressperson, Raul Grijalva, may he rest in peace. He just died. He represented my part of Tucson and also the whole border region. He was a very progressive Democrat, real Chicano activist guy. He's one of the very few politicians who's ever represented me that I agree with 100%. So I'm really sad about his death. But so the border, it really varies from region to region, how conservative people are. But I think that basically people are Democrat supporters, but they do want some. It's a complex phenomenon that's happening there in South Texas, and I'm not sure. I think there again will be a backlash because people didn't think that it was going to be as bad as it is. So yeah.
Back to one of the first questions about demography and especially worker needs for workers in the U.S. I think, ultimately I have this fantasy that at least if this thing settles out, our food will not be being produced by exploited laborers who have no labor protection. But what are the real researchers projecting about how this is all going to settle out and the effects on labor and agriculture and vegetable production and meat processing and all those other things in the U.S., which are currently really dependent on unprotected, undocumented workers?
Yeah, and farm workers are one of the most exploited class in the United States, and they've been that way for many years. I mean, Edward R. Murrow did this Harvest of Shame, that was in the 1960s, and then They've always been this very, very poor, exploited class, and a lot of them are undocumented, like 70% is what I've heard. However, that's why we have so much cheap, abundant food in our country. And if we actually had to pay these people real wages and worker protection and all that stuff, the food would cost much more than it is. And you see that in Europe, food costs are much higher than they are here.
What's the projection? What do you think will happen to that?
I don't see much. In my book, I talk about some laws that they're trying to get passed to protect the rights of farm workers. And these are very basic stuff like sanitation in the fields, and so you don't have to live in a hole in the ground or in a shack or something like that. And a lot of the farm workers are migrant workers. They travel around, whole families. So protection about child labor. I mean, the whole farm worker issue is an extremely difficult, complicated issue, and I don't see any huge change in that. It'd be nice if we could get some protection for farm workers.
Will these current government actions?
Well, if these laws were passed, but again, they introduce, progressive people introduce them every year, and they never go anywhere because of big agriculture.
This current, program of the undocumented workers in the whole country.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to be the effect we'll see?
I don't see, they keep talking about mass deportations, but I don't think that's going to happen because, for one thing, agribusiness needs these workers. And there have been many, a friend of mine told me that he would see, they would hire guards, their own guards, to keep Border Patrol away from their workers, from their fields. The guards on horseback would patrol the fields to keep Border Patrol from arresting their workers. So you have this real tension there between, what agriculture business want, what agriculture interests want, and what this whole new, rounding people up thing. And I've heard they're already having trouble rounding people up. They don't have enough people. They're not finding enough bodies to arrest. It's possible that they could go after workers in the fields. But as I mentioned in my talk, that workplace enforcement never been very popular in the U.S. for the exact reason that we're talking about, that the business owners don't like it. There is this e-verify thing. I'm sure if anyone has applied for a job, you have to prove that you're a U.S. citizen. But there's also a big market in fake documents. You can get fake Social Security cards. And then they say, oh, I didn't know the guy used fake documents. So the more they try to crack down on this, the more fake documents are. And as you saw in the Solito, he had very good fake documents. They're really good at making this. So, so anyway.